This is Gen X Amplified episode number 33, and today it is all about storytelling. And that's right. And why you must understand the power of telling a great story in order for you to inspire and create more impact as a leader. So, are you ready? Let's do it.
And now that we're leading the companies, we're the ones who have to infuse the corporate world with meaning and purpose. That's how you get loyalty from your teams, your partners, and now your millennial employees as well.
Welcome to Gen X Amplified, where we bring you inspirational and entertaining conversations with successful Gen X leaders and entrepreneurs.
This is the show created just for you. The powerful generation between the boomers and millennials to help you amplify your story,
Maximize your impact,
and become Gen Exceptional in business and in life.
Now, here's your host, Adrian Porter.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gen X Amplified, the personal development podcast for Gen Xers, the powerful generation between the boomers and those millennials, where it is our mission to help you amplify your unique brand and your story so you can maximize your impact as leaders in the marketplace. Thank you so much, as always, for your download, for listening and your attention to this podcast. It means a lot. So today I am very excited because we are going to discuss something that I'm extremely passionate about, and that is the importance of telling your story as a business, as a personal brand, or anyone looking to persuade with their ideas and make a massive impact. And right now, there is no other person that I can think of to discuss the wonders of storytelling than my featured guest, who is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, communication coach for the world's most admired brands. He is the president of Gallo Communications Group and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other numerous publications and media. Now, as an author, he has written some watershed books, many of which are my absolute favorite, including The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, The Apple Experience, Talk Like TED, and many others. And now he is here on Gen X Amplified to unpack his latest gem, which is called The Storyteller's Secret, which focuses, obviously, on the power of storytelling. So without further ado, please welcome my exceptional guest, the one and only Carmine Gallo. Carmine, how are you?
What a build-up. I'm fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, you missed the most important part of my biography. I am a proud Gen Xer.
Yes, you are. You are a proud, and the word, listen, everybody, is proud. Another fellow Gen Xer on the show. Yeah, thank you very much for being on. I am really excited, and that is no understatement, Carmine, because I am a huge fan of your work. I've read many of your books. I have used your books in my own personal and professional growth. And I have a little story, pun intended, is that back in 2011, Carmine, I just left, or got laid off, I should say, from my job as a marketing director for Cartoon Network. And I was thinking about my next move, and I start really talking to my wife about, doing more consulting. And I love public speaking. And she, for my birthday, like 2 months later, she got me a gift. And it was a book. And the book was titled The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs.
Yes. Wow, that's great.
Yes. And I read it, I dug in, and it was very instrumental. So, you have been part of my life indirectly for a little while. So I'm glad to have you on.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that story. No, that really makes me proud. I love what I do. I don't write books on communication skills because it's something that I think can help make me money. I started writing The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs and then others because I really believe in the power of ideas. And I believe in the power of people's ideas to build brands, to sell products, to change the world, certainly to improve their careers. And so I began writing even before I had a publisher, before I even knew that it would sell any books. But I think that's the secret to writing books that people like and people can learn from. I don't write books to make money, although the money starts coming when you write good books. You know, It's one of those things. But I wrote books originally because I wanted to share my knowledge of communication skills, but also to help people articulate and communicate their great ideas. So it's all worked out. It's a win-win for everybody.
No, it's definitely a win-win. It's been a win for me, obviously. And I'm not just saying that because you are my guest on the show. And I really admired your work. And not only, the books that you have written, that I've read, that I've implemented in my day-to-day, they have been very valuable. And it's not, they aren't filled with lofty, intangible, aspirational content. I mean, you have a lot of really great tactical, great examples. And you briefly just talked about like why you began to write these stories, why you focus on communications. I wanted to unpack that a little bit briefly because I want to get into the book. But have you always been a kind of a consultant focused on communication? Did you work in the traditional corporate setting prior to this career?
I've always been a journalist. I went to Medill, the Northwestern School of Journalism.
Okay.
And I worked at CNN. And so I've been a journalist for a long time, and that's how I started applying my skills, my journalism skills, to the corporate world. I got tired of doing the daily grind of reporting, and I was a television anchor for a while too. Okay. But speaking of stories, because that's a great question, how'd you get started doing this? I just recalled almost the day when I transitioned to being a writer and having my own business. I was working at CNN, and this was in New York. I was covering business news.
Okay.
Lou Dobbs hired me. I think he's at Fox Business now, but Lou Dobbs hired me for a show called Money Line. It was a very famous business show. And every week, I got to interview some of the world's leading economists, business leaders. And I realized something, Adrian, that the same people, the same faces were on the shows week after week after week. The same people. And this applies to all of your listeners today. The ones who stood out, the ones who were repeat visitors and guests, were the ones who could tell a story and communicate more effectively. And to this day, like 15 years later, I watch CNBC. I watch CNN. I watch all the business shows. The same faces are there. It's the same people. The same guests, the same economists, the same business professionals. But here's the thing, and without naming any names, are they the most expert? Are they the only ones who know about a particular subject better than anybody? Not necessarily, but they can communicate really, really well. Right. And when they do, they're in that Rolodex. Okay, we're gonna come back to this person week over and week, time and time again.
Right.
So that's where I started teaching executives and brand leaders how to tell your story more effectively, how to communicate what you do, the vision, the values behind your product in a way that captures people's imagination, gets people excited to work with you.
So I can see how when you observed those repeat guests and the anchors and the talent, you're right. There was something there, and it may not necessarily be about the years of their experience or their expertise on the subject matter, but it was the delivery and the type of engagement that they portrayed that struck a chord with you. And it sounds like you took that observation coupled with your passion and your understanding of the power of the tool, the communication tool, and you translated that into your own career.
It's taking your passion. I believe that passion is everything. Some people underestimate it. Some people dismiss it. I still believe passion is everything. There isn't one person who I have interviewed or who I've worked with over the last 25 years or so of really studying communication. If you go way back to college,
right.
There isn't one person who is a successful business leader or an entrepreneur who has taken something from nothing, from just an idea, and turned it into a worldwide brand, who isn't abundantly passionate, almost obsessive, you got to use the word obsessive, about his or her topic or that product and how it can change the world. So I really do believe that great communication comes back to being passionate about your topic.
No, it is, and a great example, and this somebody I'm sure that you're going to talk about. And I actually mentioned in the intro how I first knew about you is that when my wife bought me the Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, and because she knew that I'm an Apple geek, I'm an Apple fanatic. I love not just the product, but being a brand guy, and just I'm passionate about the brand, and what Steve and those guys have done is great. But when I read that book, it opened the door why Steve does what he does, and there's so much passion behind that, with his focus on simplicity. And to your point, the leaders that are out there that are the game changers, that separate themselves from the ordinary, you're right. There's a lot of passion there, whether they're Bransons, whether they're, Jobs, the whole nine. There's passion that's threaded in everything that they do.
Well, I'll tell you something fascinating about Steve Jobs and how this applies today to all of your listeners. When I wrote my first book on Steve Jobs and presentations, I really focused on the presentation skills, which is why it's called The Presentation Skills of Steve Jobs. But looking back on it, Steve Jobs was the world's greatest brand storyteller. That's what he was doing. And that's why I include him in my new book on the Storyteller's Secret.
Right.
I have a whole chapter on him because he actually was storytelling. It wasn't just how to design a presentation, although that was a part of it. It's storytelling. And what's fascinating to me, and this is a lesson for all of our listeners today, a technique, a takeaway that you could use today. In my research over the last couple of years on storytelling, I talked to a number of Hollywood screenwriters. Now, you were in entertainment, you know this.
Yes.
In movies today, in all commercially successful movies, there's a 3-part structure. And some people don't realize that, but there's a 3-part structure that every successful commercial movie has to have. You have to have this, or a producer won't even look at it.
Right.
Right. So Act 1, just for people who don't know, is the setup, which is kind of like the status quo. Here's our hero's world, and here's what our hero does day to day. Act 2 is the conflict. That's where Titanic hits the iceberg. Okay, that now we have a conflict that we have to resolve. And then Act 3 is the resolution, how the hero overcomes the conflict and makes the world a better place, or makes his life a better place. Act 1, 2, and 3. Oh, and by the way, they always have to have a happy ending.
Right.
There's a reason for that. Do you know, neuroscience has shown, Adrian, that we are hardwired for a happy ending? You have to find, and this is really interesting, anthropologists have found that we have to have meaning in the struggle. Remember that famous book, The Man's Search for Meaning? Right? Famous book. We all struggle. That's a part of nature.
Right.
You're going to go through struggle and hardship. We have to find meaning in the struggle. So when we hear a story of a Tony Robbins, for example, who lived in a 400 square foot apartment, and struggling to make money, or someone who's gone from rags to riches, it actually connects with us in a meaningful way. We like to hear those stories. We need to hear those stories. So it's fascinating to me, and I got a little off topic, but the point is, if you go back to the great Steve Jobs presentations, all the way back to 1984 when he first introduced Macintosh for the first time, his best presentations follow a 3-act structure. It's fascinating, and I have it in the book. So where Act 1 is, here's the status quo.
Right.
A lot of technology companies missed the age of the microcomputer. IBM is trying to dominate the entire industry. So even had a villain. The villain was IBM.
Right.
So here's the villain. And he even used the words of movies. He said IBM is bent on world domination. IBM is turning its guns against the last bastion of freedom, Apple. So it was like this dramatic thing. Act 2 is the conflict. Okay, so that's the battle between good and evil, between Apple and IBM. And then Act 3 was the Macintosh and how the Macintosh was going to make the world a better place. Fascinating stuff. So that reminds me that all great presentations have, and I actually outlined this using a speech from Malala Yousafzai. Her speech when she won the Nobel Peace Prize
Okay.
outlines the three-part structure. So that's something that anybody can do today. When you walk into your next business pitch, or you're trying to just pitch an idea to a boss, follow 3 acts. Act 1 is the status quo. Here's the way our industry looks today. Act 2 is the iceberg coming. You may not even see it because it's too foggy, but this is the problem that's coming. Mm-hmm. Act 3 is, how is my idea or product going to make the world a better place?
See, I'm over here I love this stuff, Carmine. And you're right. When you could take that 3-act structure and overlay it in any great life experience, movie, famous movies, Star Wars, the Yoda and the status quo, and Luke is over there with his uncle and Tatooine and the conflict and the Death Star, and you can take the Titanic, which I think is a great analogy, hitting the iceberg. You can take that 3-act structure and overlay it into all the pieces of media that we are fascinated with as humans. And then, to your point, if we're so fascinated with those storylines, we should apply that structure when we are trying to persuade, when we are trying to build an audience, when we are trying to convince. And so I love that. So let's get into the book, because we actually started talking about some great, because this, again, and I encourage all of you listening, if you haven't gotten the Storyteller Secret, definitely get it. We're going to talk about it some more, but also pick up Carmine's previous books that I've mentioned, The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, Talk Like TED. I mean, all those books are really applicable in helping you enhance your storytelling. So this current book, Carmine, The Storyteller's Secret, From TED Speakers to Business Legends, Why Some Ideas Catch On and Others Don't. Can you tell us, because as I just mentioned, you've written many, many great books on presentation skills, communications, even stories, especially with Talk Like TED. Why did you decide to write this particular book?
I decided to write this book because I had to. This book was not something I just came up with. I didn't come up with the idea of, hey, people should tell more stories. It's a great topic. It was told to me every time I interviewed or spoke to a very well-known venture capitalist or billionaire leaders or VCs. And I asked them, what's the problem in communication today? It always came back to storytelling. And true story, this is Vinod Khosla is a billionaire venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. He co-founded Sun Microsystems. Okay. I had just written Talk Like TED, and he invited me to speak at one of his annual conferences where he gathers the CEOs of his portfolio companies. Mm-hmm. He's like 200 of them. He's a very big venture capitalist. And I had attended the reception, and there were a lot of big names around me. It was one of those heady experiences. Bill Gates was to my left. Oh, wow. The former Prime Minister of England, Tony Blair, was to my right. Condoleezza Rice was there. No. Sergey Brin and Larry Page. And so I'm at one of those points where I'm starting to slink in my seat there. And what am I doing here? Right. And he got up on stage and he said, all of you are brilliant people, which is why I invest in you. But few people know how to do storytelling. And that's why I brought Carmine to speak with you about storytelling.
Wow, that's great.
But here's the thing. That was the first time I had heard the term necessarily applied to me. And I realized, that's what he's getting at. Because all the communication books I've been writing, I call it communication. It's storytelling. How to tell the story behind the brand, the product, the idea. How do you tell the story behind it? Then I interviewed Ben Horowitz, who is the partner of Andreessen Horowitz, right, another billionaire venture capital guy. And he said that storytelling is the most underrated and underappreciated skill among young people and entrepreneurs today. And then I saw Shark Tank. This all happened all within a week or two. I saw Shark Tank, and who I'm sure all your listeners know, and Barbara Corcoran was on Shark Tank, and Barbara Corcoran said, show me an MBA and your sales numbers. That's fine, but tell me a great story and we'll talk. So do you see how it all came together?
Right.
It's like, well, okay, maybe I ought to write about storytelling.
No,
I do feel like I'm one step ahead. And I thought I was behind because everybody who I know, business leaders, Richard Branson, my first chapter is on Richard Branson. Richard Branson has said very specifically that you cannot be a successful entrepreneur today unless you're a great storyteller.
Right.
You got to be able to get people excited about your ideas. So I assumed that I was behind the curve. But instead, I'm not. I'm actually a little ahead of the curve because I don't think a lot of your listeners or a lot of book readers or business people understand just how important this skill is to their careers. But they're getting it, which is why we're talking about it.
No, and they are. I mean, there's something that I'm committed to. I mean, even, my show, this podcast that they're listening to, I position it as, the platform for this generation that sometimes gets neglected for many reasons because we're squeezed between those two generations of the boomers and millennials. But there's a lot of power now because based on the age and the life stage that we're in now, there's a lot of power in our story. So I talk about story all the time, but and I've read this book, and it is literally fascinating. And to your point, there may be a lot of people talking about it, but the way that you've outlined the relevance and the value of storytelling with the examples and the visceral descriptions, and for me, like the stories that come out of this book that's about stories are so fascinating to me. Like, for one, you talked about Shark Tank, Carmine, and you talked about Barbara Corcoran. The example you gave, which I must have missed that episode or didn't hear about it. I was sleeping. Charles Michael Yim. Awesome. And for those of you who are not familiar, he was a contestant, I believe, on Shark Tank, and he created this product. Actually,
breathometer.
Breathometer. Can you just share with our listeners about that? Because I love that.
Well, Charles Michael Yim was a young man who grew up poor, didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of resources, and started trying to figure out ways to make money. And he had a knack for selling and for pitching ideas. Even when he was in grade school, he would trade business baseball cards, that type of thing, lemonade stands, and he realized, hey, wait a minute, I kind of have a knack for this.
Right.
But he constantly studied communication and how to pitch ideas more effectively. So he came up with this idea called breathometer, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's one of those portable breathalyzer tests that's tied to an app.
Right.
So it's very convenient. You bring it into, you carry it in your car or whatever, or in bars. You walk out of a bar, and the app, you blow into it, but the app on your phone tells you what your blood alcohol is.
Right.
And it works very well. You got to have a product that works. So that's a caveat to everything we're talking about today. You got to have a decent idea.
Right.
And now what I can do is help you communicate that idea effectively. But if you have an idea that doesn't work, that's a problem. Right. So this actually worked. And Charles Michael Yim really focused on how to hone in that message where he could get it down to about a minute. But it took him hundreds and hundreds of different tries to refine the message. So when he got on the Shark Tank in about 60 seconds, he could tell a story that draws you in. And he started with, picture this. You're at a bar. It's a busy bar. You've had a few drinks. So he kind of brings you into the story immediately. And he demos the app. And he did all of it in about 60 seconds. But it was very clean, very crisp. He had practiced it. And Charles Michael Yim, his claim to fame is he was the first entrepreneur, I believe the only, unless it's happened recently, but he was the first entrepreneur to receive an investment from all 5 of the judges on Shark Tank.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then he did that. He also made the pitch in front of Richard Branson, and he also won a pitch competition in front of Richard Branson. But he's a communicator first.
Yes.
Most people who have a product, it's confusing. It's meandering. There's no point to it. You're not sure. You're not sure where it fits in a category.
Right.
Whereas he was a good storyteller. But that actually goes back to his grade school days. I mean, he was a good storyteller from the beginning, really honed his skills.
No, he did. And just to add to that further, Carmine, I mean, that there were many examples in the book, and again, I'm a huge fan of storytelling, and also, I'm a proponent of everyone at all levels being able to use story. Whether it's an elevator pitch, you're trying to convince your boss, you have to be able to communicate your idea in a succinct, short message. And that example that you provided in the book with Charles Michael Yim, when he stood on that platform in front of the judges in Shark Tank, and he said, "Picture this: you're at a bar." That was fascinating. He was setting the scene of something that all of us are familiar with. Even if some of us may not go to bars or drink, we do know, we can envision what the scene may look like. And then he talked about, in a visceral way, imagine you're at a bar, you had a couple of drinks, you're having a good time, you may be a little tipsy. Now you have to go home. You're at that point where you have to decide, do you get in your car in the state that you're in, if you're good enough or not? And then he demonstrated, to your point, the product and the solution that he had created, the breath thermometer. And that last line that you wrote that he said to the judges, "Come with me on this journey so we can make smarter, safer decisions, one breath at a time." You cannot get more simple than that.
And think about what he just did. Look, actually, you just reminded me of something. The words you just used. You just said, he set the scene.
Yes.
That's the language of narrative. That's storytelling.
Right.
He's setting the scene.
Right.
And that's act one. Every great presentation falls under the 3 acts. I'm telling you, that's act one. He just set the scene. This is the way it is. So you're the hero. The hero is in a bar, and then set 2 is the hero encounters a problem. The Death Star. Okay,
right.
He might be getting into a car and he's drunk. That's a problem.
Right.
How do you resolve that problem? And then he ends with, this world can be a better place, right? Because he's come along with this journey, and we can transform the world. Okay. Everybody wants to be a part of a journey where they can help transform something. So if you can get your listeners to be part of a journey where they help transform an industry or the world, that's even better. Why do you think all of us dumped ice buckets on our head?
The ice bucket challenge.
I have a whole chapter on the ALS ice bucket challenge.
Right.
Yeah, Pete Frates, the baseball player who was behind that movement, who kind of triggered that movement because he got ALS, college baseball star. He is a storyteller. He's a communicator. He was always a great communicator from his grade school days. And I've got a great chapter where I talk to his mother, because he cannot speak anymore. He's confined to a wheelchair, and he can't speak, but because he has later stages of ALS. But I argue that we never would have heard of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and never would have raised hundreds of millions of dollars for ALS, that's actually now making a lot of progress because of it, unless there was a face to that movement and someone who could carry the movement as a great communicator and storyteller. That's who Pete Frates was. That's how, movements, facts alone do not trigger movements. It's a story that triggers a movement.
Well, I love what you just said, and that's worth repeating. Facts alone do not, create a movement. It's the stories.
It's the stories.
The stories.
And I can go through any movement. There is always a storyteller behind the movement.
Right.
I don't have too much history in the Storyteller's Secret, only because, quite honestly, people kind of get bored of, history. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I do too.
But, I've got a couple of historical. I've got Winston Churchill and I've got Martin Luther King.
Right.
And Martin Luther King was interesting because Martin Luther King obviously triggered a civil rights movement. But and Rosa Parks, but Martin Luther King was a communicator and a storyteller who worked at it over many, many years. I make the argument that the I Have a Dream speech was only as effective as it was because he had given something like 2,500 speeches before the dream speech. And the best part of the dream speech was that it was improvised. It was actually, part of the speech was actually improvised.
Right.
And it was only improvised because he was able and capable of, he was very effective at improvising because he was such an effective and skilled orator.
Right.
But he didn't start that way. Martin Luther King did not start that way. when he was giving speeches at the Baptist churches. He worked at it. He became a skilled orator. So what we see at the end, what we see is like the pinnacle speech, only came after many, many, many years and thousands of rehearsals for something like that.
Wow.
But the whole point is I can argue that if you name a movement and there's a storyteller behind that movement. Yeah, Lean In is another example for all business people. Okay, all of our listeners probably have heard of Lean In and Sheryl Sandberg.
Yes. I
have an entire chapter in Storyteller's Secret of Sheryl Sandberg, and I argue you never would have heard of Lean In if it had not been for the fact that Sheryl Sandberg started sharing her own personal stories, her own challenges of being a working mother. If it were just all facts and figures, which Sheryl Sandberg admitted that she was originally going to do, she said it would have failed because it never would have connected with people emotionally. But all of her presentations and her books on Lean In were filled with stories instead. And that she only did that because she got some outside assistance. People saying, Sheryl, this book is boring. It's all numbers. Take care. And she said, oh, gee, maybe I ought to be more open about my story. That's what launched Lean In, and that's what triggered that whole movement of Lean In. So I'm confident you never would have heard of Lean In if it had not been for someone who became a good storyteller.
No, you would have. And that's such a great segue into kind of what I also next want to talk about in relation to the book is this particular audience that we're speaking to today. And the Gen Xer, the mid-career professional entrepreneur, kind of that mid-30s, mid-50s. And, what I try to do is really unveil and amplify, again, the unique power of everyone's story that fits into that category. Because, again, you hear a lot of discussions and focus and targeting and fervor around to millennials, which is important, and to boomers, which are important because of their disposable income, because of leadership, because of what have you. And at times you may not see the same type of acceleration when it comes to kind of that mid, squeeze between these generations. But there's power in the story of a Gen Xer relative to a Gen Z or a millennial. There's their experience, there's the expertise, there's the pain, there's the triumph. You mentioned in your book, turning trials into triumph, which I love that, by the way. And what I want to do is to help encourage people to tell their unique story, because the people that you're leading now, Gen Xers, we're the leaders now. We're leaders in our careers. We're leaders in our jobs. We're leaders at our homes. We're raising kids. We're leading indirectly and directly. Tell your story. And even the book you mentioned, like when I talk about millennials, you focused on millennials at one point, and you said millennials are inspired by leaders who tell stories that infuse their company with purpose and meaning. To me, that speaks directly to a Gen Xer.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't necessarily thought of that because it's the Gen Xers who are the ones leading those companies.
Exactly.
And actually, and they're the ones who are infusing those companies with meaning and purpose.
Exactly. And so
a little more so than the boomers, because I've noticed the boomers are a little bit more into hey, you're here at working for my company and you're lucky to have a job type of thing, because that's the generation they're from.
Right.
Whereas the Xers came up in a little different generation.
Right.
And we are much more focused on having a meaningful work life. And now that we're leading the companies, we're the ones who have to infuse the corporate world with meaning and purpose. That's how you get loyalty from your teams, your partners, and now your millennial employees as well.
See, that is so key. And that is what, we try to focus on over here, and what I try to focus on when I consult, when I speak, when I talk to Gen Xers, because it's not just about, hey, Gen Xer, build your own personal brand for your own personal and professional growth. It's also, how do you become a better leader? How do you maximize your impact as a Gen X leader? And to do that, to maximize that impact, you have to encourage, you have to influence the people that are looking up to you, the millennials. You have to understand what moves them, what speaks to their heart, to their mind. And to your point, as a Gen Xer, to be an effective leader, you have to infuse your story, your communication, your leadership style with purpose and meaning.
And let me give you a very rock solid example of what it could mean to a company real quickly. KPMG is a giant accounting firm, one of the top 4 accounting firms in the world. KPMG was finding, and this is a Harvard Business Review case study, okay? So this is all verified and it's out there. Anyone can look it up. KPMG was finding that their employee base was getting demoralized, like most, frankly, employee bases around the country today. And they took a survey of thousands of employees, and they found that a company with meaning and purpose behind it would be a better company to work for. People would be more engaged. They wanted to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And how did they do that? Here's the point. How did they create a company of meaning and purpose? Through storytelling. Through storytelling. And this is a Harvard Business Review, and it's online today. You could go see it. Through storytelling. So they started to teach their managers how to tell the stories of how KPMG is making the world a better place. How KPMG helped fund World War II's efforts, defeating the Nazis and all that stuff. I mean, KPMG has transformed the world. But most millennials, especially young people working for the company, they just came in to do a certain job. They didn't know all that. Once KPMG transformed itself into a storytelling culture, and that's what they call it, a storytelling culture, guess what happens? Profits go up, sales go up, turnover goes down, engagement scores soar significantly. All of those. Now, look, if you had told me that storytelling can do that, even though I'm a storytelling guy, I probably would have said, well, I don't know if they'll add up to those direct numbers, but storytelling can improve employee engagement. No, the KPMG did this Harvard business case study, and they went through the numbers, and they directly correlated improvement in their business with creating a storytelling culture.
Wow, I love that example. I didn't realize that. I'm very familiar with KPMG, but
do you know why? Because it's not in my book. It came out after my book was published. Darn it!
I know. Well,
it's so recent though. Any of your listeners can go online and look it up.
Well, this is cool. See, this could be like an added addition. So with the book, listen to this episode with Gen X Amplified, and you can get the cherry on top. But this is great. I mean, there's so much I can talk about. I mean, we probably need 3 hours for this. This book is wonderful. I'm a huge fan of your work. Obviously, I love your style, and I do feel, and as you can see, that the principles that you've outlined are so applicable to this audience to really amplify the unique power and the story of that Gen X community. And becoming a better leader, understanding the strength of your story. Even some of the other examples I think are applicable, like the Dr. Edward Hallowell, right? The ADHD, which I thought was fascinating. Like, so many of us either are directly dealing with ADHD, or we have family members as Gen Xers, we have kids. You never know, but sometimes there's such a stigma with that. And the way that you articulated how Dr. Ed Hallowell framed it in a story, as opposed to all this, if you listen to ADHD and all the facts and figures and all the boring jargon, as opposed to, as you described in the book, what if you heard it described as someone with ADHD having a Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes? Like, I love that.
Beautiful, right? So ADHD. That's the chapter on why words matter.
Yes,
and how you can take even medical complications or medical issues and turn them into a positive or a negative. And ADHD is very much like that. So you could either say it's a disorder. My child has ADHD, which is why I've been fascinated with it. Do I tell her you have a disorder, or you actually have a gift? You have a Ferrari brain. It's just you have bicycle brakes. So we have to work on therapies so that all of that stimuli that comes in can be filtered somehow more effectively. And you can focus on one task at a time, because it's a matter of focus.
Right. I love that Ferrari brain. Yes.
But you know what? But think about the guy who told me that. Ed Hallowell. And here's the lesson for all of us. Ed Hallowell is a doctor, an ADHD doctor. It was a English major before he became a doctor. So he was an English major at Harvard. Then he went to medical school. And so what he does to make things understandable is use the components of narrative, one being analogies.
Right.
Analogies. Analogies are very, very powerful. And it can actually change the way you look at something,
right?
Whether it's a medical condition or whether it's somebody's idea. The way you perceive the world can be changed based on how people use words to describe what they're seeing.
Love it. Yeah, no, narrative. I love it. I love it. The way he framed that, and to me, I've never heard it described in that way, having a Ferrari mind with bicycle brakes. I mean, there's nothing negative to me about that.
Now my little girl goes around saying she has a gift.
I love it.
Think about that, right? So again, it becomes the words you use with your children, with your employees, with your partners can either empower them or bring them down. We got to be very careful about the words we use. But that's what I love this whole interview, this whole idea of empowering Gen Xers, because we have those ideas and those experiences. To power the world. So I hope that this is the type of content that can help them unleash those ideas.
Oh, I love it. And I thank you so much for that. And before I let you go, there are a couple of questions I want to ask that I usually ask all my guests. And this conversation has been so fascinating. So I can't wait to hear your answers. Carmine, if there was a song that would play when you enter a room or when you walk down the street that fits your story and the brand of Carmine Gallo, what song would that be? What would be your own personal theme song?
That's a great question. Yeah, well, it would have to either be. It would only have to be two people. It would have to be either Bon Jovi or Garth Brooks. It would have to be one of those two. So, Bon Jovi, definitely a Gen X band. I would say yes. It's My Life. Okay. It's My Life by Bon Jovi, because the part of the chorus goes, "It's my life. It's now or never. I ain't gonna live forever. I just want to live while I'm alive."
Love that. Love that. That is definitely, I love it.
It's like, you got to pave your own way.
we're gonna use that one. I love it. You're right. That is definitely a Gen X group. Man, I'm a cowboy on a steel horse. Yeah, I played that too many times. Dead or alive. Okay, and the last question, Carmine.
It's not living on a prayer. Okay.
Yeah, that's another good one, right? If there was a specific tool, Carmine, or resource, whether it could be an app, a website, another book, in addition to this great book, that you recommend to Gen Xers, people in our generation who want to really maximize their personal development and tell better stories and lead, what would it be?
My favorite book now that I've actually read, and I think it's, I don't like most business books because I think they're kind of empty. Mm-hmm. I do like the originals by a Wharton professor. It's called, I think it was Grant. Adam Grant is the name. So it's called The Originals. Okay. It's how to be more creative and how to be more original thinker. And a lot of the stuff that he's come up with, some of it is certainly things I've read in other books, but he makes it very easy to understand. So The Originals, and it's one of the New York Times best-selling books for the last few weeks. It's called The Originals. That's one book that I actually got something out of, and I loved it. Also, don't forget, please read Creativity Inc., the Pixar people.
Yes.
So yeah, that was last year's book, but it's excellent. So there's a couple of good books. In terms of an app that I use all the time, I know it doesn't sound this original or that new, but I kind of live on Evernote. Evernote, right? Yes. Yeah, because I'm a like ADHD, I'm a popcorn machine, so I have way too many ideas going on.
Yes,
and I need to be able to capture links and ideas and articles, regardless of what platform I'm on, whether I'm on my notebook or my iPad. So Evernote has been a real lifesaver for that. But let me give you an unusual app, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you, if you want to be more productive, get a fitness app or a Runkeeper, by Nike. That's going to give you the energy that you need. You need to lose weight, and you need to run, and you need to exercise, and you need to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, because that's going to give you the energy that we as Gen Xers need to keep progressing and to keep keep people energized with our ideas. Otherwise, if we get too slovenly, we're not going to go anywhere.
See, I love this whole story of the recommendations, like the originals and Creativity Inc. Like while we're watching Toy Story and Cars and all that, we're sitting back eating our chips and reading The Storyteller's Secret and writing our notes in Evernote. We need to work all that off and get the Runkeeper. And yeah, I didn't get a chance to read Creativity Inc. yet, but I want to, because I'm a huge Pixar fan, because I have a 7-year-old son, so he got me into the whole ecosystem of Toy Story, and I love what they do. And obviously there's a common denominator with Pixar, and one of the great storyteller that you mentioned earlier was Steve Jobs. And
yep. And at the end of my book, the last chapter, one of the second to last chapter in The Storyteller's Secret is about John Lasseter.
Oh, yes, John.
Pixar. Yeah, so read that chapter, because Steve Jobs gave John Lasseter one of the greatest piece of advice I had ever heard, and it's probably a good way of ending this show. Steve Jobs turned to Lasseter and said, in every frame of every movie, just make it great. Make it great. Is it as great as it could be? And Lasseter said that piece of advice has applied to every movie he's ever made.
Make it great. Carmine, this was great. Thank you. Let's let everyone know how they can keep in touch with you and find out what you're doing. The best way they can reach out.
If they can remember just a good Italian name, Carmine Gallo, that's the best way, because you could just go to my website, Carmine Gallo, GALLO.com. Or if you just want information on this book in particular, you want to know how to order it, it's available everywhere. But if you want more information, you want to read anything about it, we have some beautiful slideshows, presentations created. Just go to storytellersecret.com.
Awesome. Go to those links, and everyone will have links to those websites and links in our show notes for the show. Carmine, this was great. I enjoyed this conversation. This has been one of the best conversations I've had, and I know that our Gen Exceptional audience got a lot. Everyone listening, get the book, The Storyteller's Secret. After you read it, and while you're reading it, make it great. Carmine, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Take care. Okay, that was communications and speaker expert, the awesome Carmine Gallo. Wow, I love that chat that I had with Carmine. What we had with Carmine. I want to include you because you were listening in. That we had with Carmine Gallo, and I was really excited to dig into his book, which is called The Storyteller's Secret: From TED Speakers to Business Legends, Why Some Ideas Catch On and Others Don't. Love it. I've read the book, and so many awesome stories. Remember, as people, we love stories, and this book really outlines in great detail insights on how to tell powerful stories that motivate, that educate, that inspire, that build movements and change lives. This is definitely a must read. Trust me, a must read for any business leader, entrepreneur, nonprofit leader. In fact, I really feel it's a must read for anyone who want to create more influence and more impact. So please go out and check it out. Get the book, go to Carmine's website, and to also get the show notes. Speaking of the website, to get the show notes and the links to his website and the book and other resources that he mentioned during the chat, go over to genxamplified.com/033, because this is episode 33. Also, please share this episode and podcast with your friends, with your colleagues, with your family. In fact, anyone that you know who would get a lot out of this content. And to help us spread the word, please give us a rating and review, a short written review in iTunes, especially if you have enjoyed this podcast. I would really appreciate it. So that will wrap it up for me for this episode. Again, thank you so much for listening. And to all of you, my Gen Exceptional listeners, until next time, all the best to your success. Take care.